My daughter mailed me a clearance fruitcake with my name spelled wrong. Called me Margaret, not Mom. Told the neighbors I abandoned her husband's parents in a snowstorm. That day, I sat alone, held a stack of bank statements, and watched $45 zero go up in flames. I burned baby photos, letters, even her wedding picture. The last thing to curl in the fire was my own smiling face. Sometimes you don't lose family. Sometimes they erase you piece by piece. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. I had just stepped inside Amanda's house when I caught the faint scent of cinnamon candles, the kind she used to beg me to buy when she was little. The living room was warm, tidy, and full of early Christmas cheer. A golden wreath hung above the mantel, and beside it sat a framed photo from last year, Amanda Dylan, their 2 kids, and me holding the turkey with a ridiculous Santa apron on. She gave me a polite, quick hug. Not too warm, not too distant. I took off my coat, smiled, and said I thought I'd bring the old recipe binder next week, the one with Nana's pecan stuffing. I asked if she wanted to make the cranberry sauce together again, like we always did. But her face stiffened. That smile faded as fast as it came. She didn't sit. She just crossed her arms and said it gently at first. Mom, this year. We think it's better if you don't come. I felt it before I understood it. Something dropped in my chest, like a stone in water. I blinked and waited for the rest of the sentence to fix it. Maybe she meant something about switching houses or a new schedule. I asked her what she meant, and she sighed like she was tired of carrying a burden that I'd never known existed. She said Dylan's family was planning a bigger, more formal dinner this year, and they wanted a certain kind of energy. I didn't fit into that. They needed the atmosphere to be a little more polished. Then she smiled again, that tight, apologetic smile that people use when they don't want to admit they're hurting you. I asked her gently, almost in a whisper, who would be there. She said Carol was coming. Carol, the woman who once called me pathetic for working weekends at a nursing home. Carol, who always wore pearls too tight and made comments about the kind of woman Dylan should marry. That Carol. Amanda said she thought Carol fit better with Dylan's parents. They get along. She always brings elegant wine. She knows which fork is which. I didn't say anything. I didn't even breathe. I looked past her through the doorway into the dining room. The table was already set early as always. A velvet runner stretched across the wood I helped her pick out years ago. There were name cards tucked into gold holders. Mine wasn't there. But I saw Carol's name by the seat I had sat in last Christmas right beside Amanda, where we used to nudge each other during grace and laugh about undercooked biscuits. Amanda touched my arm and said something like, I hope you understand. I didn't really hear her. I just nodded because that's what you do when the door is closing and you're still inside, unsure of how to leave with dignity. I stood on the front porch for a while before walking back to the car. The cold stung a little more than usual, but I didn't zip my coat. I watched the lights in the window flicker soft and gold, like a home that had quietly moved on without me. I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel. I could hear the Christmas playlist she always used playing softly through the door behind me. One of the grandkids laughed. Someone opened a bottle of wine. Carol fit better. That sentence stayed with me the whole drive home. It didn't rage inside me. It didn't burst. It just echoed slow and low like a wind through an empty hallway. I thought of all the times Amanda called me her best friend. How she'd fall asleep on my chest after crying about school, about Dylan, about babies, and bosses and dreams. I thought of the meals we made, the birthdays I planned, the Christmases I built by hand. But now I was not even an ingredient in her perfect holiday recipe. I was excess, something to be trimmed for presentation. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself the last of the apple cider from Thanksgiving. It had gone a little sour. I drank it anyway. I sat by the window facing the tiny apartment complex across the street. Some neighbors were putting up lights. Two kids were arguing about snowflake shapes. I wondered if they'd remember their mother when they were older. Or if one day she'd be replaced, too. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too numb for that. But something in me began to shift. Not out of anger. Not even out of pain. Just a quiet, cold understanding. I had given my daughter everything. And now I wasn't even allowed to bring stuffing. They said Carol fit better. And I finally understood. I had been trying to earn a seat at a table I built with my own hands. I was 33 when I buried Tom. He'd left the house that morning with his thermos in one hand and Amanda's mitten in the other. By nightfall, a police officer was at my door explaining there had been black ice, that it happened quickly, that he hadn't felt a thing. I didn't cry right away. I was too focused on not falling apart in front of our 5-year-old daughter. The next few weeks blurred into casseroles from neighbors' whispered condolences and the rustle of paperwork I couldn't understand. But one morning, I woke up before the sun and realized no one was coming to rescue us. There wasn't a second parent anymore. There was just me. So I did what I had to do. I took the part-time cashier job I'd once joked about when Tom offered to support us alone. I added a nighttime cleaning shift at the medical clinic down the block. The hours stretched long and colorless, but they were steady. I learned how to scrub blood from tile and smile at customers who didn't look me in the eye. I remember Amanda once asking me if I was tired. I told her I was strong. That felt truer than saying yes. There were men eventually. Kind ones. One or two who really did try. But every time someone asked me to go away for a weekend or come meet their kids, I thought about how Amanda still slept with a lamp on and asked me to check her closet twice before bed. I couldn't divide my heart. I couldn't risk her feeling like she came second. So I turned down dinners. I sold the piano Tom had bought me for our anniversary and used the money to pay for her braces. I stopped going to book clubs, skipped my high school reunion, and let go of any idea that my life might include romance again. It wasn't that I stopped wanting things. I just stopped needing them more than I needed her to feel safe. Each birthday, I made a point to write her a letter. Not with advice or wishes, but with memories. Like how she used to cling to my legs when I cooked or how she'd wait at the window for Tom's truck. I wanted her to remember she came from love, not loss. In the quiet moments when the house was asleep and the bills were stacked and the milk was almost out, I'd allow myself 5 minutes to sit still. Sometimes I'd cry, but more often I'd just breathe. Then I'd get back up. Because the alarm would go off in 3 hours, and Amanda would need a lunch packed and a clean sweater and someone to remind her that she was safe and seen and never alone. People told me I was strong. What they didn't see was that strength is often silent. It doesn't roar or demand applause. It folds laundry after midnight and says no to things it secretly longs for. It gives up the last piece of cake and pretends it wasn't hungry anyway. I never regretted choosing her. I only ever hoped she'd remember. When Amanda and Dylan started house hunting, they were bright-eyed and full of ideas. They wanted a wraparound porch, hardwood floors, a fireplace for stockings. I listened quietly and smiled when they showed me listings. They weren't just looking for a house. They were building a future, and they believed in it enough for all of us. They came up short on the down payment. Dylan had just switched jobs, and Amanda's hours had been cut. They were discouraged. I didn't even hesitate. I withdrew $45 from the account I'd been saving since Tom died. That money was supposed to be for emergencies or retirement, but in that moment, my daughter's happiness felt more urgent than my future comfort. She cried when I handed her the check, said she'd pay it back in a year. I didn't ask for repayment. I only asked for photos of the house once it was theirs. She sent one of the porch lights glowing at dusk. I saved it to my phone and looked at it often. The mortgage turned out to be steeper than they'd expected. Groceries and repairs added up. Dylan got laid off for a while, and Amanda didn't want to stress him. I started sending them $2,500 a month, every month, for 6 years. I told her it was just extra support. She called it love. I called it necessary. To make it work, I gave up things slowly. First, I sold the car and took the bus. Then I stopped buying fresh flowers for the table. Eventually, I sold the house Tom and I had bought together and moved into a one-bedroom apartment above a hardware store. It smelled like paint thinner some nights, but it was warm and quiet, and the rent was cheap. I remember skipping breakfast more than once. Not because I was dieting. Because I had $60 until the next check, and Amanda had texted asking for help with a broken washer. I wired her the money before she even asked twice. She thanked me with a heart emoji. I stared at that little red heart for a long time. I bought them a new fridge when theirs gave out. Covered the cost of a water heater when pipes froze. Sent gift cards when Amanda hinted that groceries were tight. I bought a crib for their second child, then later helped with daycare fees. When Dylan got a new job, they celebrated with takeout and champagne. I watched the pictures on Facebook while eating toast with peanut butter. Sometimes I'd sit in my apartment at night, listening to the neighbor's dog barking through the walls, and remind myself why it all mattered. Amanda had a life I helped build. A safe home. Smiling kids. A future she could depend on. That was enough. I never asked for credit. I never told friends how much I gave. The truth is, I didn't want to be praised. I just wanted to feel useful. Still needed. Still a part of her world, even if only through checks and wiring fees. Looking back, I don't think she ever realized what it cost me. Not in dollars. In hours scrubbed at the hospital. In groceries not bought. In birthday cards for myself that never arrived. But I held my head high because every sacrifice had her name on it. Love, I've learned, is often invisible. It shows up quietly, pays the bills, sends the check, skips the meal, then smiles and says it's no big deal. It didn't happen all at once. The distance grew like ivy inch by inch, wrapping around the things I used to call mine. At first, I didn't even notice. One day, Amanda stopped calling me Mom. It wasn't dramatic. She just said Margaret instead, like trying on a new coat that fit better with the rest of her wardrobe. I told myself it was just a slip that she was tired or distracted, but it kept happening. At her son's birthday party, someone asked who I was. Amanda smiled too quickly and said, "That's my biological mother." The word hit me like a slap in a silent room. No one noticed the way I blinked or how I stepped back from the circle. I stood there, holding a gift I'd wrapped with the same paper I used when she was 5. It was a dinosaur puzzle. He opened it, looked up, and said, "Thank you," politely. Amanda moved on to her mother-in-law's present. A branded smartwatch in a designer box. Everyone clapped. I smiled anyway. Every December, I mailed a small box with homemade cookies and a card. I always wrote something personal, something soft. In return, I got whatever was left in the discount bin. Last year, it was a package of sugar-free cookies that had expired in September. My name was spelled Margaret, not even the courtesy of Anna. That same Christmas, I saw photos of Carol opening a Coach handbag. Amanda had tagged the store and captioned it with something about spoiling the woman who raised her right. I stared at the screen for a long time, then closed my laptop without reacting. I didn't cry. I just felt heavy in a way that no tears could fix. There was a dinner once. Amanda had invited a few couples and asked me to come early and help with prep. I said yes, even took the bus across town carrying a tray of lasagna I'd made the night before. She barely looked up when I walked in, told me to set the food on the side table and keep my coat on because they were tight on seating. I offered to stay in the kitchen. She didn't protest. I ended up rinsing wine glasses while laughter echoed from the dining room. I could hear Amanda's voice bright and effortless, telling a story about a vacation they took. Carol had gone with them. I hadn't even known they'd left the state. Later that evening, I stepped into the hallway to grab my scarf. That's when I heard Dylan's voice in the next room. He said it casually, as if he didn't think I could hear. "She's sweet, but just doesn't belong in our circle." No one disagreed. I held the scarf tighter, then walked home in the dark. The lasagna tray was still half full. No one offered to pack me a plate. The small cuts never looked like wounds. They came in the form of missed invitations, side glances, silence, where warmth used to live. But they bled me dry just the same. I stopped offering to help. I stopped asking if they needed anything. I started folding my life into smaller and smaller spaces. Amanda didn't notice. She was busy planning brunches and joining charity committees and posting photos of matching pajamas with her kids. Carol always stood beside her in those pictures, arms wrapped around the boy's face lit up like she belonged there. And maybe she did. The worst part wasn't being forgotten. It was being edited out. Each holiday, each birthday, I wondered what else I had to give before I'd earn my place back. But the truth was, I had already given too much. I had emptied myself into her future, only to realize she had closed the door behind her and left me standing in the cold. Still, I waited. I smiled when needed. I kept my voice steady and my hands busy. But inside, something was unraveling. Quietly. Sharply. And I knew it wouldn't hold forever. The phone rang just after 5. I was folding laundry warm towels stacked beside me when I saw Amanda's name flash across the screen. For a second, I smiled. I thought maybe she was calling to say they'd changed their minds. Maybe she wanted me there after all. I picked up quickly, trying to sound like I hadn't been waiting all day. Her voice was sweet, overly sweet, the kind of tone she used with her boss when asking for time off. She asked how I was doing, said she missed me, mentioned that the boys had drawn me a card. I said I'd love to see it. I said I could drop by and help wrap gifts next week if she needed an extra hand. There was a pause. Not long, but just enough to feel it shift. She said Christmas was a little tight this year. Dylan's family had decided to do something formal, more upscale. She said his parents wanted a certain kind of vibe. Polished, she called it. The word landed like cold water down my back. I didn't say anything. Just waited. She went on calmly as if she was discussing seating arrangements. She said maybe it would be best if I didn't come this year. That she didn't want me to feel uncomfortable. That it wasn't personal. It was just easier this way. She added something, then something that slipped in like a knife wrapped in a napkin. Maybe I could spend the day with my soup kitchen friends. They'd probably enjoy a warm presence like mine. I felt the air leave the room. My fingers tightened around the phone, but I didn't trust myself to speak. I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything would pour out. Every dollar, every night alone, every bite I skipped to make sure she had more. I swallowed hard and told her I understood. My voice barely rose above a whisper. She seemed relieved. She said she hoped I'd still have a beautiful day. Then she hung up just like that. Like we were done. I stood there for a while staring at the wall. The quiet pressed in all around me. Even the laundry stopped feeling warm. I walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge. There was an old casserole dish on the top shelf, half empty, something I'd been stretching for 3 days. A bottle of ginger ale from Thanksgiving sat in the door almost flat. A few eggs, a bruised apple, a single slice of cheese. I looked at it all and whispered to no one. Maybe I do belong there more. I closed the door slowly, as if afraid it might break the silence. Then I leaned against the counter and just stood there. Not crying, not raging, just feeling the full weight of something that had been building for years finally settle into place. She had said it wasn't personal, but it was. It was the most personal thing of all. She had chosen to erase me from the table I helped set, and she'd done it with a smile. That night, I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't read or knit or play solitaire like I usually did. I just sat in my chair and stared out the window. Snow had started to fall soft and slow. The streetlight made it shimmer. It looked like peace. But inside me, something else was waking up. Not bitterness. Not yet. But something sharper. Something tired of being quiet. The next morning, I pulled down the box from the top shelf of the closet. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside were folders thick with bank statements, old birthday cards, handwritten notes from Amanda back when she still called me Mommy. I carried it all to the kitchen table and set each piece down carefully. Years of paperwork, each page a receipt of something given without question. I opened a notebook and started adding up numbers. It took hours. I went line by line, month by month. Mortgage payments, wire transfers, gift receipts. Appliances, I had delivered flights. I helped cover daycare deposits I paid without being asked. The total came to just over $183.00. I stared at the number until it blurred. My chest felt tight, but not from sadness. From clarity. Cold and bright. Then I stood up and went to the fireplace. I hadn't used it much. Most nights I preferred silence over flames. But this night was different. I brought the box over and started with the oldest items. Letters Amanda had written in crayon when she was 6. Mommy, you're my hero. I love you big as the sky. I pressed each one into the fire and watched the edges curl, colors darkening, then vanishing. Next were the bank statements. Page after page of numbers, each one a little piece of me. They didn't burn fast. The ink held on as if it didn't want to let go. But eventually, each page gave in to the flame. I fed the fire slowly. A receipt for a fridge. A thank you note she never signed. A photo of the kids on Easter wearing outfits I had sewn myself. I remembered hemming those pants by hand, squinting in lamplight, too tired to think. I dropped the photo in and didn't blink as it blackened. Then came the wedding album. A smaller copy Amanda had given me wrapped in soft tissue. I opened it carefully. There she was in lace and pearls. Dylan's smile too wide. Carol standing near the altar, hand on Amanda's back. I had been pushed to the second row. I paused at the last page. A photo of all of us. Amanda and Dylan in the middle. Carol on one side. Me on the other, holding the bouquet. I ripped the photo from its sleeve and placed it at the top of the flames. The fire danced around it, slowly curling the corners inward. First, the bouquet faded. Then, Dylan's shoes. Amanda's dress. And finally, the part with my face. My smile. My eyes. Burned black and silent. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just watched until the photo was gone. The fire was quieter now. Gentle pops and whispers filled the room like it was breathing. I sat back in the armchair and stared at the embers. Everything I had clung to was gone. Every proof, every piece of paper that tried to convince me I was still needed. Still part of something. But I didn't feel empty. I felt clean. Like something had been carved out, yes, but something stronger had been left behind. A space where the begging would stop, where the giving wouldn't cost me anymore. The last flicker faded, and I wrapped myself in the old quilt Amanda once gave me. The one that had her name stitched on the corner. Tomorrow I'd fold it and drop it off at the shelter. Tonight I kept it wrapped around me, not for comfort, but to remember. This was the end of the giving, and the beginning of something else. My phone buzzed just after lunch. I was rinsing out my tea mug, letting the hot water steam against my tired hands. The message preview popped up on the screen, cheerful as ever. Amanda, can you pick up Dylan's parents from the airport? Their flight lands at 3? I didn't open it. I placed the phone face down on the counter and watched the light blink once, then go dark. I dried my hands and moved to the living room where the crossword puzzle from the Sunday paper still sat half-finished on the coffee table. I filled in a few words. Capital of Estonia. A 4-letter verb for regret. Then came a longer clue. Privileged assumption of one's right to something. 11 letters. I counted boxes, checked letters I already had. E-N-T-I-T-L-A-M-E-N-T. I wrote it in slowly, each letter landing with more weight than the last. Then I set my pen down and smiled to myself. Not wide. Just enough to feel it. I made another cup of tea. Let the water boil fully this time. I added a splash of lemon and carried it to the window. Outside, it was calm. The trees stood bare, the sidewalk empty except for one jogger in a bright red beanie. The sky had that winter gray that never quite turns into snow. I sat down and pulled the quilt over my legs. The one Amanda used to snuggle into when she was small. I didn't think about the message. I didn't wonder what Dylan's parents would do when they arrived. I imagined the airport, the sound of luggage wheels, dragging across tile the loudspeaker announcements, the growing impatience in their voices. It didn't concern me. The clock moved past 3. Then 3:30. Still, I said nothing. My phone buzzed again. I didn't check it. I just reached over and turned it off entirely. The screen faded to black. The room felt a little quieter. I took another sip of tea and closed my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anyone. Not for permission. Not for thanks. Not for inclusion. By 4, I'd finished the crossword and was halfway through a paperback I'd meant to read all year. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. I curled my toes beneath the quilt and let my body rest against the soft chair cushions. The silence wasn't lonely. It was earned. Somewhere I knew there were phones ringing, texts being typed, in frustration, plans being rearranged. Dylan's parents might be pacing by the arrivals curb, calling Amanda in growing panic. Amanda might be trying to reach me, assuming I was running late or stuck in traffic. But I wasn't. I was home, and I wasn't going anywhere. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't a tantrum or a statement. It was a boundary set quietly and held without apology. I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard anymore. I didn't need to explain myself to people who had never really asked. I turned the page of my book and found a passage about stillness. It spoke of seasons and how some are meant only for rest. I read it twice, then folded the corner down gently. Outside, the light was starting to fade. The neighbor's porch light flicked on. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes moved faintly, barely audible. I finished my tea and washed the cup slowly, savoring the warmth in my palms. Then I sat back down, wrapped the quilt tighter, and let the evening arrive on its own time. And for the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged, right where I was. It started with the sound of tires crunching gravel. I looked up from the book in my lap and saw a dark SUV pull into the driveway. The sun had already started to set, casting long shadows across the yard. I knew who it was before the door slammed. Heavy footsteps on the porch. A sharp knock, then another, louder. I didn't rush. I placed the bookmark between the pages, folded the quilt, and stood slowly. My back was straight. My hands were steady. When I opened the door, 4 faces greeted me, all flushed with anger. Amanda stepped forward first. Her eyes were wild, her voice sharp. She asked how I could do this, how I could humiliate them like that, how I could leave her in-laws stranded after all they had done. Dylan's parents stood behind her, fuming. Dylan hovered in the middle, jaw tight but silent. I didn't flinch. I said nothing. Amanda called me selfish. Said I'd crossed a line. Said I had embarrassed her in front of people who mattered. Her voice trembled as she spoke, part fury, part disbelief. Like she still couldn't wrap her head around the fact that I hadn't shown up when called. I glanced at Dylan's father. He stepped forward and pointed a thick finger at me. He said people talk, that reputations are fragile, that I was making things hard for Amanda and Dylan in their circle, that someone like me should be grateful just to be included. I tilted my head slightly, still silent. He took it as a challenge. He said women like me should know better than to bite the hand that feeds them. That one wrong move can shut a lot of doors. That there's a price for this kind of behavior. Amanda folded her arms. Dylan finally spoke, saying I had caused unnecessary drama. That they were all trying to keep the peace and I had made everything harder. I let them speak. I let them run out of steam. Then calmly, I stepped forward. I looked at each of them one by one. This is my home. My voice was soft but unwavering. You may leave now. Amanda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Dylan's father's face turned red. His wife grabbed his sleeve. No one moved. I waited. The air between us shifted. What had once been power on their side now sat quietly in mine. Dylan took a step back. Amanda looked down at the porch. No one said another word. I closed the door. Slowly, deliberately. The latch clicked into place like a period at the end of a sentence. Inside, the quiet returned like an old friend. I walked back to my chair and sat down. Picked up my book, found the page. Outside, I heard car doors slam again. An engine revved. The tires spun gravel once more as they backed out and drove away. I didn't smile. I didn't sigh. I just read. Because in that moment, there was nothing left to prove. The storm had come and gone. And I was still standing. The paper was folded neatly on the bench outside the corner cafe. I hadn't planned to stop. I only meant to drop off a letter at the mailbox, but the headline caught my eye. Elderly woman abandons guests during holiday storm. My stomach sank before I even picked it up. I knew. Somehow I already knew who it was about. I unfolded the page and scanned the first paragraph. It described a poor couple left stranded at the airport by a cold, reclusive relative. It mentioned icy roads, holiday chaos, emotional distress. It painted a picture so far from the truth, I had to reread it twice. The storm, for starters, had never happened. The sky had been blue all day. No wind, no snow, just silence and my own company. The names weren't printed, but the clues were all there. It said the elderly woman refused to pick up family members, leading to a scene in front of dozens of travelers. It mentioned community ties. It quoted anonymous sources calling the behavior shocking. I could almost hear Carol's voice between the lines. I folded the paper again and tucked it under my arm. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. This was different. This was heat rising from somewhere deep and old. At home, I poured myself tea and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just sat there and stared at the quiet space around me. If they wanted a storm, I could give them one. But not in the way they expected. I opened the cabinet above the fridge and pulled down the accordion folder I hadn't burned. Some things I had kept. Not out of hope, out of instinct. Inside were records. Bank transfers, signed checks letters confirming furniture deliveries. I sorted each one into piles. Mortgage support, household expenses, emergency bailouts. Then I opened my laptop. Amanda's social media was still public. Photo after photo of holidays I had helped fund. Smiling in front of the tree I paid for. Holding drinks in the kitchen I helped remodel. Posing in dresses I had bought. I took screenshots, labeled them, cross-referenced the dates with the payments in my folder. The woman in the article was a ghost version of me. But I had evidence. Not for revenge. Not even to defend my name. Just to reclaim my truth. I created a binder. Not digital. Something I could hold in my hands. I placed each page inside a plastic sleeve and arranged it by year. I added captions beneath the photos, noting what I had contributed. By midnight, the stack was 2 inches thick. The article hadn't broken me. It had drawn a line. One that separated the Margaret, who stayed silent from the Margaret, who now knew better. This wasn't just about being excluded from dinner. It was about having my entire life rewritten by people who never earned a single page of it. I placed the binder on the table and ran my hand over the cover. It wasn't anger anymore. It was purpose. Let them talk. Soon they would have to answer to the truth. The dress still fit. I hadn't worn it since Amanda's wedding, but I remembered every thread. Dark, navy, simple cut satin neckline. I zipped it up slowly, steady hands, pulling fabric over skin that had weathered far too much silence. I pinned my hair back. No makeup. Just clean lines and a clear face. The briefcase sat by the door, already packed. 12 folders inside. One for each guest. I didn't check them again. I knew exactly what they held. The road was quiet, just like last year. Just like every year before they told me not to come. Lights twinkled on the porch as I approached their house. Laughter drifted out from the windows. I stood there for one long breath, then stepped inside. No one saw me at first. I walked through the open foyer, the sound of heels sharp against polished wood. The dining room came into view. Amanda's back was turned. Dylan was carving the roast. Carol laughed too loudly at something the man beside her said. Then someone saw me. A hush fell like a match blown out mid-burn. Heads turned. Amanda's mouth fell open. Dylan froze knife, suspended over the platter. I stepped closer to the table. One breath. One heartbeat. Then I said it. I thought you should know who paid for this table. No one moved. I clicked open the briefcase, pulled out the first folder, and handed it to the woman nearest me. Her hand trembled as she took it. Inside a printout of the mortgage payments. Highlighted. Annotated. I moved clockwise around the room. One by one. Photos, receipts, transfers. Pictures of holidays I wasn't invited to, but had unknowingly funded. Each guest took their folder. No one spoke. Amanda's face was pale. Dylan reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. Carol looked down at her place-setting lips pressed tight. I didn't explain. I didn't raise my voice. I let the document speak louder than I ever had. When the last folder was gone, I set the empty briefcase on the floor beside me. My eyes swept over the table one final time. Crystal glasses, silver cutlery, centerpieces I'd seen on Amanda's Pinterest board months ago, each detail dripping in the kind of wealth borrowed from someone else's sacrifice. I waited for someone to say something. They didn't. I nodded once. Then I turned and walked back toward the door. I didn't slam it. I didn't look back. But I knew. Why? The silence I left behind would echo far longer than any apology. Chairs scraped back as guests flipped open the folders. Some blinked. Others leaned in closer, mouths slightly parted. A woman in red pointed to the mortgage receipts and whispered something to the man beside her. He looked up at Amanda, then back down. Silence stretched heavy and unfamiliar. The rustling of paper replaced the sound of cutlery. Dylan's cousin muttered something about the monthly transfers. Carol's bridge partner narrowed her eyes at a screenshot of Amanda, on vacation drink in hand, captioned with a glowing tribute to family support. Another folder held grocery receipts and utility bills marked PAIDB YMARG AREATA in bold ink. Amanda's voice broke first. She laughed nervously and said it was all being misrepresented. Said I had asked to contribute. Said this was all out of context. But her words stumbled. The color drained from her face. No one nodded. Dylan followed quickly, saying families help each other all the time. That it wasn't unusual. That this wasn't some courtroom. But his voice cracked at the end. He looked toward his parents for backup. Dylan's father straightened in his seat, eyes cold. He said I had clearly misunderstood my role. That if I gave freely, I shouldn't expect applause years later. But no one clapped now. They just kept reading. A young couple exchanged a look. The woman closed her folder gently and laid her hand on the man's arm. A man near the end of the table let out a low whistle. He said he didn't know generosity could be weaponized so quietly. Someone else murmured that it wasn't weaponized. It was just finally visible. Carol said I was making a scene. That this was inappropriate. That Christmas wasn't the time for drama. But she said it too loudly, too late. The dignity had already left her voice. The room no longer belonged to them. I stood still. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend. Amanda Rose's folder clenched in her hand. She told me this wasn't the way to handle family issues. That I had humiliated her. That I had no right. But no one came to her defense. I took one last look at the table. The candles flickered. The roast sat untouched. The centerpiece I'd seen on sale last month now looked like stage dressing. I met Amanda's eyes, then Dylan's. Then I said it. Enjoy your dinner. It's the last one I'm buying. And I turned. The hush behind me wasn't just shock. It was the weight of truth. The kind that didn't need to be shouted. The kind that stayed behind after the door quietly closed. The letter came first. Not from Amanda. From the bank. A foreclosure notice addressed to them, but misdelivered to my old apartment. I stared at the envelope for a moment before opening it. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, folded my hands, and let the news settle like dust. I had stopped sending money almost a year ago. Quietly, completely. It didn't take long for the math to catch up. The mortgage I had once helped cover now stood like a wall they couldn't climb. The silence that followed the Christmas dinner had stretched for months. Not a call. Not a message. Only public whispers and the slow unraveling of a lie that had lived too long. Then Dylan lost his job. I heard about it through the same neighbor who once forwarded me Amanda's holiday cards. Office politics, poor performance, something about reliability. I didn't need details. Sometimes things crumble exactly the way they were built. Quickly and under pressure. Amanda showed up in April. She didn't text ahead, just knocked softly, like she had never knocked before. I opened the door and found her standing there smaller than I remembered, eyes swollen, hair unwashed. She clutched the sleeves of her coat like she was holding herself together. Her voice cracked when she spoke. She said they lost the house, that Dylan had been let go, that the credit cards were frozen, that no one was answering their calls anymore. Then she looked up at me. Her eyes filled her voice barely above a whisper. I lost you. I stood still for a moment. I could have said so many things. I could have cried or closed the door or let the anger speak for me. But instead, I said what had lived inside me for too long. You didn't lose me. You gave me away. The air between us shifted. Amanda let out a sound I hadn't heard since she was a child. It wasn't quite a sob. It was something deeper, more hollow. She stepped forward like she wanted to come inside, but I held the doorframe. I told her I forgave her. Not because she deserved it, but because I needed it. For me. She nodded slowly. Her mouth trembled. Then I told her something else. Something harder. Forgiveness doesn't mean funding. She closed her eyes and nodded again. No protest. No negotiation. Just quiet acceptance. I told her I hoped she would be okay, that I wanted her to find her footing. That love still lived somewhere between us, but it would have to grow without money, without expectations, without the kind of history that demanded more than I could give. I invited her in for tea. We sat in silence, and I let her talk. About the debt, about Dylan's anger, about the people who disappeared once the gifts stopped showing up. She cried. I listened. But I didn't reach for my checkbook. I didn't offer to help with rent or bills or a new start. I had given my start away already. Now I was guarding my ending. When she left, I walked her to the door. She turned once before stepping outside. Her eyes were tired but softer. She said, "Thank you. For the tea. For listening. For not slamming the door." I told her that doors stay open when people stop walking all over the welcome mat. She gave a tiny smile. Then she left. And I sat by the window, letting the light come in. Not with joy. Not with triumph. Just with peace. A small one. The kind that grows after fire when the ground finally stops shaking. The scent of cinnamon and roasted sweet potatoes drifted through the house long before the doorbell rang. Margaret set the last plate on the table, straightened the linen napkins, and lit the candles she'd saved from last year. The flames danced, gently reflecting in the polished glasses. Everything was simple, but everything was full. At exactly 4 o'clock, the first knock came. It was Lucy from next door, arms full of cranberry muffins still warm in the basket. Behind her came her 2 grandsons, one shy and quiet, the other already asking Margaret if he could pet her cat again. Soon after came Thomas and Edith, the couple who ran the local bookstore. They brought a pie and stories about Christmases in Vermont. The house filled quickly, with coats and voices and the sound of real, easy laughter. The table was smaller than the one she used to set, but it didn't feel that way. Not with hands reaching across to pass the stuffing. Not with someone nudging her to try the mashed turnips, even though she swore she wouldn't. Not with chairs pulled close, just to hear a silly joke told twice. The kind that only makes sense when you care about who's telling it. Margaret moved easily in this space. She wasn't performing. She wasn't providing. She was present. When someone asked her about the angel on top of her tree, she told them the truth. That Amanda made it in 4th grade with glitter that still sheds to this day. They smiled, but no one pushed. No one asked where Amanda was this year. After dinner, they played cards. The little one tried to cheat, but couldn't keep a straight face. Margaret laughed so hard her shoulders shook. Someone handed her a cup of cocoa with whipped cream spilling over the top. It tasted like childhood and peace. Later that night, as guests trickled out with hugs and leftovers, Margaret stood in the doorway and watched the snow start to fall. Not heavy. Just enough to dust the edges of the night. Inside, the lights were low. The dishes could wait. Her heart felt steady. No ache. Just warmth. She reached for the Polaroid someone had snapped earlier. In it, she was mid-laugh head, tilted back, a small hand resting on her arm. Around her, faces of people who showed up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She looked at the photo, smiled to herself, and whispered the truth out loud. Family is who shows up for you, not who shows off with you.